My grandmother kept everything. That was the first thing everyone said about her. The way you'd say someone had brown hair. When she died, the house on Vermilion Street held 41 years of accumulated life, and my mother and I were the ones who had to sort through it. I want to be clear about who I was before this happened, because it matters. My name is Daniel Ostrander. I was 34. I fixed HVAC systems for a living, and I did not believe in anything I couldn't reach with my hands. I'd never had a paranormal experience. I'd never wanted one. When people told me about ghosts or premonitions, I nodded politely, the way you do with someone describing a dream. That was me, that's important. The house sorting took 3 weekends. My grandmother Ruth had lived alone since my grandfather passed in 2004, and in those 2 decades, the clutter had gone from charming to overwhelming. Newspapers folded and stacked by year, coffee cans full of buttons, a closet of coats belonging to people I'd never met. My mother handled the emotional archaeology, the letters and photographs, while I handled the physical labor, hauling boxes down from an attic that smelled like hot dust and old paper. The photographs were the problem. There were thousands of them, loose in shoeboxes, stuffed into envelopes, slipped between the pages of books like she'd used them as bookmarks and forgotten. My mother wanted to keep all of them. I wanted to be reasonable about it. We compromised by agreeing to at least look at each one before deciding, which is how we ended up sitting on the living room floor on a Sunday afternoon in October, sorting them into piles while rain came down steady against the windows. Most were what you'd expect. Faded color prints from the 70s and 80s, the colors gone orange and soft. Vacations, birthdays. My mother as a girl in clothes she groaned about. My grandfather, looking younger than I'd ever known him. It was slow, pleasant work, the kind that makes an afternoon disappear. Then I picked up a photograph that stopped my hands. It was black and white, but not old black and white. It had the crisp grain of a modern film camera, the kind hobbyists still use. It showed a man standing in front of a lake, one hand shading his eyes against the sun, the other holding what looked like a fishing rod. He was maybe in his mid-30s. He wore a plaid shirt and jeans. The man was me, not someone who looked like me. Not a relative with a family resemblance, which I'd been finding all afternoon. Faces that carried the same nose or jaw down through the generations. This was my face. The small scar through my left eyebrow from a bicycle accident when I was 9. The way my ears sit slightly uneven. The gap in my front teeth that my parents never got fixed. It was me, standing at a lake I didn't recognize, holding a fishing rod I'd never owned, wearing clothes I didn't own either. "Mom," I said, "look at this." She took it, and I watched her face do something complicated. She frowned. She held it closer. She held it further away. "That's a good picture of you," she said slowly. "Where was this? I don't remember this. I've never been there. I don't fish. Mom, I've never owned a plaid shirt like that in my life." She turned it over. On the back, in pencil, in handwriting that was unmistakably my grandmother's careful cursive, it said, August, 1961. My grandmother was born in 1938. In August 1961, she was 23 years old. My mother wasn't born until 1965. I wasn't born until 1991. I did the math 3 times because the first 2 times I assumed I'd made an error. There was no error. The photograph claimed to show me, at roughly my current age, 30 years before I was born. My mother laughed, but it was the uncertain laugh people use when they want something to be a joke. "It's a coincidence. Some man who looked like you." People said your grandfather looked like Gregory Peck. Everybody looks like somebody. "He has my scar." You can't see a scar in a picture that size. But you could. I made her look again. I made her look at the eyebrow. She went quiet, and then she put the photograph down on the keep pile and picked up the next one, and I understood that she needed it to not be real, so I let her have that. I did not let myself have it. I put the photograph in my jacket pocket and I took it home. For a week, I tried to be the person I'd been before. I told myself the obvious explanations and I lined them up like tools on a bench. A relative I resembled, a trick of similar features magnified by imagination. My grandmother had lots of photos. Statistically, one of them was bound to look like someone. The date on the back could be wrong, could refer to something else, could have been written by mistake. None of them survived contact with the photograph itself. I kept taking it out and looking at it. The scar, the teeth, the ears. And there was something else. Something I hadn't noticed in the living room. In the man's other hand, the one holding the fishing rod, he wore a watch. A cheap, digital watch, with a rectangular face. Digital watches didn't exist in 1961. The first ones came out around 1970. I know this because I looked it up at 2 in the morning, sitting at my kitchen table with the photograph under a work lamp. So either the date was wrong, or the photograph was fake, or something was happening that I did not have a tool for. I decided to find the lake. It sounds strange maybe that this was my response, but I'm a practical man, and the only concrete thing in the photograph was the location. If I could find the lake, I could stand where the man stood, and I could prove to myself that this was some ordinary place and some ordinary mistake. The background was clear enough, a lake, a tree line, and on the far shore a distinctive rock formation, 2 large stones leaning against each other like a collapsed doorway. I spent evenings searching. I posted the rock formation on a few regional forums for hikers and anglers, cropped so nobody could see the man. Someone recognized it within a day. It was a small lake called Hansel Pond, about 2 hours north, up in the part of the state where the towns get small and the cell signal gets unreliable. Not a tourist place. A local place, the kind you'd only know if you grew up near it. My grandmother grew up near it. I checked. The town where she was born was 20 minutes from Hansel Pond. I told myself that explained something, though I couldn't have said what. It felt like progress. It felt like the mystery was getting smaller and more manageable, when in fact, it was doing the opposite. I drove up on a Saturday in late October. The trees were mostly bare by then, and the sky was that flat white that makes everything look like an old photograph itself. I had the picture on the passenger seat. Every so often I glanced at it. Hansel Pond was harder to reach than the map suggested. The last 2 miles were dirt road, rutted and slow, and I passed maybe 2 houses the whole way, both of them shut up for the season. When I finally came out of the trees, the lake spread in front of me, exactly as it did in the photograph. Gray water, dark tree line, and there on the far shore, the leaning stones. Smaller than I'd imagined. Everything real is smaller than the photograph makes it. I walked the shoreline until I found the spot. It took a while, but I knew it when I reached it, because the angle of the stones lined up precisely with the background of the picture. I stood where the man had stood. I held up the photograph and matched the horizon, and I felt nothing, which was almost a relief. It was just a cold lake in October. No presence, no chill, no watching eyes. Just water and wind and the sound of the last leaves letting go. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough that my feet got cold. I was about to leave, actually turning back toward the car, when I noticed the tackle box. It was wedged between 2 rocks at the waterline, half in and half out of the pond. Old, rusted, the kind of green metal box people carried decades ago. It had clearly been there a long time. I only saw it because the water was low. I don't know why I opened it. I've asked myself that many times, and it was rusted shut and I had to work at it, and any sensible person would have left it, but I'd driven 2 hours and found nothing, and I think I just wanted to hold something in my hands that felt like an answer. Inside, packed in what had once been cloth and was now rot, was a small waterproof pouch. Inside the pouch was a photograph. It showed my grandmother, young, laughing, standing at this same lake, and she was holding the hand of a man. The man was me. Same face, same scar, And in this photograph, I was looking at her, not the camera, and the expression on my face was one I recognized because I make it. I've seen it in mirrors and in candid shots my ex-girlfriend used to take. It was the face I make when I love someone and don't want them to know how much. On the back, in the same careful pencil, H and me. He says he'll explain everything someday. I don't care if he ever does. H. I didn't sleep that night or the next. I sat with the two photographs side by side, and I let the practical part of my mind burn itself out running the same impossible loops. And when it finally went quiet, something else was left. A question I hadn't let myself ask. Who was H? My grandfather's name was Walter. He was not the man in the photographs. I'd known my grandfather. He was a heavy-set man with a bald head and thick glasses. Nothing like me. Nothing like the man at the lake. Whoever H was, my grandmother had known him before Walter, or alongside Walter in 1961, 4 years before my mother was born. My mother's birth year is 1965. Walter and Ruth married in 1963. There was a gap, a stretch of my grandmother's early 20s that nobody in the family had ever talked about. Because why would you? It was just the ordinary blank space before the story everyone knew began. I went back to the house on Vermilion Street. My mother had nearly finished clearing it by then, but the boxes of paper were still in the dining room, and I told her I wanted to look through the letters. She didn't ask why. I think she'd been carrying her own version of the photograph question all this time and had decided, the way she decides most hard things, not to look at it directly. It took me 2 days. My grandmother, who kept everything, had kept letters too, bundled with string, sorted by year. The bundle marked 1961 was thin, just a few. They were all in the same handwriting, and the handwriting was familiar in a way that made my hands cold, because it was mine, not similar to mine. Mine. The particular way I crossed my sevens with the European stroke I picked up from a coworker, the way I never closed my lowercase a's all the way. I read them in order. They were letters from a man to a woman he loved, written over the course of one summer. They were gentle and funny and a little sad. He talked about how he couldn't stay. He talked about how there were things he couldn't tell her. Not because he didn't trust her, but because knowing would hurt her, and he'd rather she remember him as a mystery than as a wound. In the last letter, dated the end of August 1961, he wrote, "You asked me again last night where I come from, and I almost told you. I want you to know I almost did. But I've learned that some knowledge only arrives when it's ready, and it won't be ready in your lifetime. It'll be ready in someone else's. If a young man ever comes to you asking strange questions, be kind to him. He won't understand yet either. R. I think you'll have a daughter, and I think she'll have a son, and I think that's the only way I get to keep any of this. I'm sorry I can't say it plainer. I love you in an order that doesn't make sense." I put the letter down. Outside, a car went past on Vermilion Street, and its headlights swept the wall, and I sat in the dark of my dead grandmother's dining room and understood that I was reading my own handwriting, describing me. I think she'll have a son. I want to tell you, I found a rational explanation. I want to tell you there was a hoax, a distant relative, an elaborate coincidence, that I tracked down the truth, and it was ordinary and disappointing. That's the ending I would have believed in before. Here is what actually happened. I went home and I could not stop thinking about the watch, the cheap digital watch in the first photograph, the one that shouldn't have existed in 1961. It nagged at me more than anything else because it was the one detail that broke the story open instead of sealing it shut. A man who looked like me could be a coincidence. Handwriting could, with enough denial, be explained. But the watch was a thing from the future, worn by a man in the past, photographed by a woman who would become my grandmother. I don't own a watch like that. But I found myself over the following weeks thinking about buying one. It became a small, persistent itch. I'd see them in stores and stop. And I'm telling you this plainly because it's the part that frightens me most. The wanting didn't feel like mine. It felt like remembering. It felt like something I was supposed to do because, in a sense that broke my understanding of time, I already had. I have not gone to the lake again. I have not bought the watch. I have the 3 photographs and the letters in a drawer in my kitchen, and most days I manage not to open it. But last week I was cleaning out my car, and under the passenger seat where the first photograph had ridden with me up to Hansel Pond and back, I found a 4th one. Same black and white film. Same crisp, modern grain. It shows me, standing at the lake, older than I am now, gray at the temples. Lines around my eyes I don't have yet. I'm shading my eyes with one hand, and with the other I'm holding a fishing rod, and on my wrist there's a cheap digital watch with a rectangular face. I'm looking straight at the camera, and I'm smiling. The way you smile at someone you're glad to finally see. On the back, in pencil, in handwriting, I've stopped pretending isn't mine. It says, "Take your time getting here. She'll wait. So will I." I've started sleeping with the drawer locked. It doesn't help. The photographs don't move. They don't change. They just sit there being true. What keeps me awake is simpler than a haunting. It's that I can feel the shape of a decision forming inside me, slow and patient, like water finding the low place in a floor. Every day it feels a little less like a choice and a little more like a memory of a choice I've already made. I keep the 4th photograph on my nightstand now. I tell myself it's so I can throw it away when I'm ready. But I look at that older face, at that easy smile, at how happy he is, and I understand that he isn't warning me. He's welcoming me home.